Welcome, travelers, to our second annual Spook-tacular extravaganza. Oh! Come with us as we talk about the history of one of the world's oldest and most popular monsters. Swing a VIP as we discuss a popular video game franchise and talk about the changes it's made over the years. Learn about a different type of role-playing game that wants you to play homage to years of storytelling and lore. And finally, we talk about some of our favorite blood-sucking media. The children of the night are calling. Pull up a chair next to a fire, drink a hot beverage, and don't get too spooked at all the terrible goofs. All this and more on Fandom Roulette! Hey everyone, welcome to Fandom Roulette. Can I just say, Cody, that guy we hired to do the intro was fantastic.
Yeah, 100%.
That's going to get us all of our podcast awards, all of the parties. That would be a horrible name for a podcast award. Hey everyone, welcome to Fan Roulette. This is a podcast where we talk about a myriad of nerdy things, including history, video games, role-playing games, and when we feel like it, lots of other nerdy stuff. So this is Joe.
And I'm Cody.
And we want to welcome you to our second annual Spook-tacular Extravaganza.
Ooh, how many more spooks can you get in there?
I don't know. I'll try to figure it out.
All right, thank you.
So anyways, man, this is kind of weird too, because like we're kind of like doing a callback to the early days of the podcast.
Yeah,
we tried very, very hard to make all the segments line up thematically, and then we realized that was a goddamn nightmare.
Oh,
and we dropped that stuff really early.
Nightmare fuel, definitely. But
remember when we did one about cowboys, and then you were talking about how like a part of Super Mario Odyssey he wore like a cowboy hat. It's like, let's do it.
Oh,
Red
man.
Dead Redemption 2 ain't out yet. Let's do it.
If you got a moment and you want to listen to a year of goofs, blunders, and just general amazing podcasting, look no further than season 0.
Just the worst audio quality coming from this end of the microphone.
Oh boy.
But anyways, yeah. This week we're talking about vampires. Blah.
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 1, 2.
Very, very nice count reference. I wasn't expecting that one to bust out. I love it. But anyways, so Cody, because I think most of the stuff we're going to be talking about this week has been things that we did over the weekend to prepare for this episode. What are you going to be for Halloween this year?
For Halloween, I will probably be a Ghostbuster because it's become my staple go-to and I haven't had the magic or the resources to make something new.
That's fair.
What about yourself? What do you got going on for a costume?
Well, on Saturday, I went to a Halloween party with one of my friends, and we were two of the Gregs from Four Gregs, which is a spinoff of a spinoff of a spinoff from a webtoon on homestarrunner.com.
Wow, that's taken me back a day or two.
Oh, I know, right? It was great because we also wore them to Comic-Con, and like either people knew exactly who we were, or we had to explain it and be like, so anyway, have you ever heard of Homestar Runner? So like, okay, yeah, you're like 12, so of course you haven't. So like there was like a spin-off of it, and he answered emails, and then there was a spin-off of that one where they were teen girls, and then there was a spin-off of that one where they were 4 nerdy guys. But anyways, being sci-fi Greg is obscure enough when you have D&D Greg with you, so I'm probably just gonna bust out my classic pirate for the actual day itself when I'm passing out candy.
Nice.
That was a really roundabout way of saying that. But yeah, so because it's one of the spookiest and nerdiest holidays, we like to do a Halloween special.
Yes.
Wow, okay. Are you being a mean girl vampire?
Yeah. Did it not work?
Cool. I liked it. No, I liked it a lot, actually.
See, it's hard to tell because the fangs are obstructing my my beautiful words.
I know, it's like, that's half the difficulty, right?
Right. I mean,
like,
you're wearing your fake vampire fangs for the episode, right?
Yep, 100%. I have those just laying around my house.
I mean, who doesn't? Who doesn't have their copy of Twilight and their fangs ready to go at a moment's notice?
Oh, yeah. That's what we're going to be talking about. Welcome to our Twicast.
Ooh, yeah. This is our secondary podcast that we're pitching for the audience.
Of course, because this is our vampire episode, we are both Team Edward 100%.
Well, I'm actually Team Dracul.
What? That's okay. Sure.
Yeah.
He'd be really embarrassed about that book series, I think.
Oh, definitely.
I will say this though.
Are you about to defend Twilight on the internet right now?
I am about to. I was very much a person who, like, I don't think it is good, but it did inspire a whole bunch of people who to like read, and I think that's a very notable thing.
Yeah, but they read like weirdly Christian vampire smut.
I mean, it's better than reading like vaguely Christian vampire fan fiction where you change all the character names so you wouldn't get sued by the original author.
Oh, wait.
They did. That's the spookiest thing we're going to say this entire episode.
That is pure terror right there.
All right, so anyways, we're going to talk about vampires.
Yeah.
Woo. Vampires are have been around for quite a while.
And 100% real.
100% real.
Yes.
So, at least in terms of the English word vampire, or sometimes vampire, the earliest kind of us, like, sort of writing about the words, it first appears in the 1734 Oxford English Dictionary. However, we have stories about this going back even longer than that, way earlier than 1734. That's just kind of the first time we see it officially being a name in a book that you can look up for reference sake. Because the notion of vampires have existed for millennia. Cultures as far back as the Mesopotamians, Hebrews, ancient Greeks, and Romans have tales of demons and spirits, which are considered precursors to the modern vampires. Basically, these were spirits or entities that would come and, like, suck blood. Now, here's the thing. All cultures have an idea of a vampire. They all kind of vary, and they all have varying little things about them. But basically, some common attributes, they almost all drink blood. Blood was almost always seen seeping from the mouth and nose, and one was seen in its shroud or coffin, and sometimes they would be clad in linen shrouds that they were buried in. So here's one of the crazy things. In general, in these early attributions, fangs were not necessarily a feature of vampires. And while we also have this idea that they're undead, some cultures also just said that they were like living beings. So like they were just like, you were born a vampire, right? So like,
oh snap.
So I mean, it's along the lines of like, in various mythological traditions, like, it's like being like a fey creature,
Interesting.
It wasn't necessarily like, you died and became a vampire. Like, you could have just been a vampire. One other thing that I think is kind of interesting, especially considering that as we continue on, we start seeing changes to this. Vampires were usually considered bloatish in appearance, and they were usually purplish or dark in colors, which was an attribute for having recently drunk blood. So as opposed to our vampires today, which tend to be quite pale, and
glitter when they hit the sunlight.
Yeah, and glitter when they hit. Man, you read Twilight, didn't you, Cody?
I mean, I read the Cliff Notes, maybe.
Okay, there you go. All right, that's fair enough. But anyways, there are other like weird little aspects of things. So in Slavic and Chinese traditions, if an animal jumped over your corpse, particularly a dog or cat, there was a greater chance of you becoming undead. If you had a wound that had been not treated with boiling water, that was also a risk for being undead. And then some people also considered that if you were like a witch or people who had rebelled against Orthodox churches, you had a higher chance of coming back a vampire. And so basically there's all kinds of different things along those lines. Little things that you might not have done during death if you were kind of like a violent or a bad person during your life, if you had kind of gone away from the path of, what was considered good or decent. All of these were higher chances that you might be coming back a vampire. Another thing too is that some people attributed vampirism to being a revenant, which, a revenant is kind of like a cursed soul that re-enters bodies. Like, for instance, that movie, The Revenant, that came out a couple of years ago, is based off of a story of a man who, like, disappeared in the woods and was thought dead, but he came back. So, it's just that his traveling party assumed he was dead. It wasn't that he was actually, like, a revenant or anything like that.
No, that's bringing a whole new light on that movie. He came back and he was actually an undead.
Yep.
Yeah.
But, also, so, now here's some other things that start coming out from this early belief system of vampirism, which are something that kind of goes on as well, which are protection items. So these are called apotropiac. Wow. Yes.
Bless you.
Apotropiacs, which were items that were intended to ward off evil spirits. So garlic was a common example of this, as was wild rose or hawthorn plants, which are said to harm vampires. And in some places in the world, too, sprinkling mustard seed on your roof was a way to keep them away. In that case, mustard seeds, oddly enough, I can't necessarily comment on this 100%, but it would make sense to me because in the process of fermentation, you adding mustard seeds to something actually prevents the breakdown of the stuff you're fermenting, because it adds tannins to the brine, which actually helps to preserve things.
So what you're telling me is, if I get a ladle of mustard and I force feed it to Dracula, I win.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yes!
And then other things too. So obviously, like, religious items were considered, because oftentimes, yes, vampires were people who, like, were not true to the faith. So things like crucifixes, rosaries, holy water, and the fact that they were not able to come onto consecrated ground. And then mirrors were also used to ward off vampires. Although, so they don't cast shadows, which is perhaps a manifestation of the lack of the soul. And this one really became popular because of Bram Stoker's Dracula. So this is not...
can I pause for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
The shadows thing, does that mean Peter Pan is also a vampire?
I think the thing with Peter Pan was that
you're killing me.
God, I mean, it's possible. He steals young boys, and
yeah, for his undead army.
I mean, they don't age, you're right.
Yeah. So,
oh god, that's a dark turn on Peter Pan.
New theory out on Peter Pan. He's actually a vampire. Calling it.
Let's do it.
Yes.
And then some other traditions about vampirism. Vampires could not enter a house until they were invited in by the owner. But after that first invitation, they could come in whenever they pleased.
Oh, that's so generous of vampire lore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that also kind of harkens back to, like, the rules of hospitality. Which were, like, a big thing during this time period. And then, of course, here's one I think is really interesting. Folkloric vampires were believed to be more active at night, but they were not necessarily considered vulnerable in sunlight. It's just that they were more active at night. I guess because the night's more spooky, you know?
So scary.
And then one last little thing before I get into two of the most popular early things in vampiric lore, are methods of destruction. So, the best way was saying staking with wood. So, like, creating, like, a wood stake. And it depends on where you're living. So, ash was very popular in Russia and the Baltic states. Hawthorn was popular in Serbia, and oak in Silesia. But here's the thing. In a lot of places, aspen was considered the best wood because many believed that it was the wood that was used to create the cross that Jesus hung from. So, potential vampires were often staked through the heart or through the mouth or the stomach. But in all these cases, it was a way of kind of deflating the bloated vampire.
Gross.
And then another way was, of course, decapitation. Because if they don't scots to head, they can't do much bad.
I feel like that's usually a cure-all for all types of monsters is decapitation.
Yeah. With the exception of zombies, if I'm not mistaken, right? Zombies can keep. Well, I guess it depends on the zombie.
Yeah, new age zombies, like that is the way to fight them off. But I imagine older zombies might disagree.
Yeah. And then one of the last things about decapitation was that if you were suspected of being a vampire and they decapitated you, your head was buried beneath your feet, so you couldn't get at it. Now
that seems like the visually the silliest.
So as I mentioned, there are vampiric ideas and things from other cultures that perhaps we can get into in later episodes, but I don't want to go too long during this section.
Sure.
But I do want to talk about two of the most important early vampire books. The first one is the 1897 Gothic horror story written by Bram Stoker, which is, as we all know, is called Dracula. So this is a very important early work in vampiric lore. It tells the story of a count moving from Transylvania to England to try to get fresh blood. And it takes a lot of the things that we had just talked about and kind of added rules to them, added methodology to them. And it also created the popular character Abraham Van Helsing, who was a doctor who studied blood and also fought vampires. Now, here's the big thing. I think one of the most interesting aspects of the story is it is told in the epistolary form, which means that it is a series of letters, diary entries, newspaper articles, and ship's logs entries instead of our more traditional style narrative of, just kind of like kind of having a third person omniscient writer,
Yeah.
So it's interesting because it's kind of you're kind of being presented conflicting information or unreliable information, which is always, I think, more fun to read. It also establishes the idea of vampire thralls, because you have Renfeld, who was a patient at an insane asylum, who comes under the influence of Dracula and starts working with him. So this idea of vampires being able to control other creatures. And then the other one is a book called Carmilla, which is a Gothic novella written by an Irish author named Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, who his book preceded Dracula by 26 years, but it's often forgotten. I don't necessarily quite know why, but it was a serialized novella published in a magazine called The Dark Blue between 1871 and 1872, which is not an unheard of thing during this time. And it tells the story of Carmilla, who is a female vampire who often enthralls young women to be her servants, and then she feeds upon them. So one of the interesting things about Carmilla, and perhaps the reason why it's not as well known as Dracula, is the fact that there are lots of people who discuss the fact that Carmilla has some sexuality of that she's a lesbian vampire. I cannot necessarily speak on that too much, but it would make sense that might be one of the reasons why it's not quite as well remembered, but it has started to become more known about and more discussed in our era, in our age, especially the fact that it predates a lot of what Bram Stoker's did in Dracula. So there you go. That's my my brief overview of vampires, not covering a lot of things because vampires, like I said, have been around for millennia and are still popular today.
Yeah.
So everyone kind of has their own interpretation of vampires. Every culture, every era, every kind of, age has their own like definitive vampire storytelling. So any questions?
Well, first a comment and then a question. Our generation believes that vampires have like teen high school drama and glitter when they hit sunlight.
Sure.
Second, that's about all I know about Twilight.
Okay.
That is literally it. It's like a high school drama, and then people glitter. Well, I mean, and there's a werewolf that people like.
People from
even though
generation...
I heard what he does in the final book, and that kind of creeps me out. So
yeah. I had a sister who read it.
And then question.
Yeah, for sure.
It kind of sounds like you're on a team. Carmilla.
Carmilla, yeah.
Yeah. It seems like you're on that. Is that? Can I confirm or deny that?
To be fair, I've not read either of them. I just was fascinated when I discovered that there was a book that had existed for 27 or 26 years before Dracula. And there's like kind of aspects about it too that there are parallels, but once again, this is during a time where I mean, hey, it even happens today, right? Where you had a good example. I think it was in 2001. You had Pixar had a movie called The Bug's Life, and then DreamWorks had a movie called Ants, which was
yeah.
There's lots of similarities and things like that. So I'm not calling him a thief or anything like that. I just think it's very interesting that is the story that had continued and grown and become more popular over time, which is, something that we even kind of see today in certain extents. I just think it's an interesting thing to point out that there was this story that existed before Dracula. So
nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I know you're the one who usually brings in the guests.
Sure.
And this time I decided, and I didn't tell you until now, so apologies if you brought somebody into the studio. But I also reached out, made some phone calls, and brought someone in.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, hold on 1 second. Come on over. No, you wanna?
Oh.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets? But enough talk, have at you.
No, wait, hold on, stop. No.
Cody, you okay?
Guys, we're talking about Castlevania today.
Cody, I'm not gonna lie, that was a pretty good bit.
Yeah.
What a horrible night for a curse.
Oh no.
So anyways, Castlevania.
Yeah.
Geez, that's a long franchise you got there.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
So it was funny when we were deciding what Halloween thing we were going to talk about. The first thing that immediately came to mind was Castlevania. And
sure.
Sidebar, I fucking love these games.
I've loved them too from what I've played. So
right. And after doing some research, man, so the first game came out in 1986.
Wow.
Before I was even born.
Jeesh. That's like up there with Mario.
Right, right. It was one of the first games on the NES, as far as memory serves. And these games have been, like, the last game that came out was in 2014. So this
Wow.
franchise has been around for about 28 years, if math serves.
Good on them. Wow, geesh.
Yeah, and looking on, I did a quick Google search of the list of Castlevania games. There's like 31 titles.
Jeez.
And that's including some of the more obscure games in the series. But I just find these games so fascinating because over the 31 years, this game franchise has kind of evolved and changed pretty dramatically twice.
Okay.
So the first couple of games, from basically Castlevania till I believe like Dracula X, Rondo of Blood, they've been very like linear, side-scrolling action gothic horror games where you take on platform with a little bit of platforming in there. You basically play a vampire hunter whose goal is to go to Castlevania, which is the name of Dracula's castle, and defeat Dracula. And for the most part, the story elements are, except for as you go, as the games progress later, are, it's mostly you're a Belmont, legendary family of vampire slayers, using the famous whip vampire killer to kill Dracula.
Yeah.
Although, then you hit 1997, which was probably when I was in middle school.
I was 7.
No, it had. Anyways, not important.
No. Yeah.
Then Castlevania Symphony of the Night comes out.
Ooh.
Which kind of changes the genre, like the direction in which Castlevania goes into the ever so popular buzzword Metroidvania.
Ooh.
Which is, I feel like it's, so to describe it, for someone who doesn't know what Metroidvania is, it is actually weirdly on point with our season, and it's kind of a 2D exploration. Open world isn't quite the word that I want to use, but it's kind of open world-ish.
It's expansive, and
it's very expansive.
Rewards lots of adventuring.
Right. And that's where, you actually get to explore this giant castle known as Castlevania. And boy, it's pretty big. And they introduced like RPG elements that would like forever hold with the Castlevania series. Different weapons sometimes, just different stats in general. If you can find a copy of Symphony of the Night, or if you have a PlayStation 4, I believe they're coming out with a bundle Symphony of the Night, Rondo of Blood, like collector
double pack
remake.
Nice.
Although I wouldn't necessarily call it a remake. They're basically just porting it. It's a port.
Yeah.
That's coming out soonish.
At all, or?
Huh? No, not at all. It is just a port to the PlayStation 4.
I mean, to be fair, it's a very pretty game because it's that like good 2D animation with like 3D backgrounds.
Yeah, I think
the characters don't look that ugly. Like the
right.
backgrounds might not have aged all that well, but
and it's also an era where we had kind of at that point mastered the pixel art medium.
Most definitely.
So you got a lot of these beautiful backgrounds and beautiful creatures made out of sprite work, and these games were they're so good. And I actually just recently went back because I remember there's like, I would say like 4 or 5 Game Boy Advance titles, or DS/Game Boy Advance titles, where they kind of took an anime approach to the character designs so that it would attract a wider audience for the Game Boy Advance.
Huh.
And so I was playing Dawn of Sorrow, and I just love everything about those 2D RPG action adventure like worlds that you jump into, because like you go around, you kill things, and you level up, and you can get like new weapons, and the weapons were different. Like, some of them, like, had a longer reach but were slower. Some did more damage but, like, had a crazy swing time. Like, holy shit, these games are... Thinking back and even playing just recently, even with, like, the goofy anime style that they kind of went with for a couple of them, those games still hold up.
Cool.
And
so were they
more
Metroidvania-y, or were they more
platformer-y? No, they were definitely more Metroidvania.
Okay.
In fact, you don't really see I say it shifted twice, because the last, I would say, 2.5 games, if you count all the DLC, were Castlevania's unfortunate attempt at going into the 3D realm.
Oh, yeah.
Because, and maybe it's not because Castlevania didn't do hot. I don't actually know how well Lords of Shadow and Lords of Shadow 2 dealt with.
Sure.
Because that's also kind of getting close to the point where Konami is switching their tactics over to pachinko machines.
Ah, okay.
So, with the departure of certain people, Lords of Shadow and Lords of Shadow 2 was a spiritual reboot of the series, where it played very similarly to games like Devil May Cry and God of War. Very actiony beat 'em ups, if you will.
Okay.
With those 3D elements. And I remember playing Lords of Shadow. Really enjoyed that. Never picked up Lords of Shadow 2. I wasn't interested in seeing a direct sequel of that story.
I didn't even realize it came out, so that's where I am with it.
Yeah, the first one came out in 2010, and basically it follows the Belmonts, who are a family that works with, like, this kind of holy organization, who work directly with God. And there's a lot of, like, while there are pretty heavy Christian elements with, like, the certain, monsters and things that you see, it wasn't necessarily like, well, I guess with, like, the cross and stuff, it was very Christian, but it never, like, basically what I'm getting at is Lords of Shadow, spoilers for this game that came out in 2010, sorry guys, you had 8 years, you fight Satan.
Oh, okay.
And, like, it felt very on the nose.
I mean, you fight Death in Simon's Quest, if memory serves.
You fight Death in most of them, to be honest. But it's weird because Death, like the Grim Reaper, is, at least as I understand, almost like Dracula's friend. Like, they're bros, and, like, Death crashes at Castlevania every once in a while after, like, a big rager. So, like, I don't know. It was very, basically you're killing the Lords of Shadow to acquire these pieces of this mask, and then you find out that the person who sent you on this quest tricked you, and then Satan shows up, and then you fight Satan, and you beat him. But unfortunately, that for some reason turns you into Dracula.
Sure, I mean, hey man.
Yeah, hey man, I don't understand. I did play that one, and I do remember being like, hey, this is very much like Devil May Cry, God of War. Like, very specifically, the combat felt very much like God of War, with its kind of combo moves and all the different kinds of variations and weapons and stuff. Even borrowed some things from, like, Shadow of the Colossus, where there were a couple of, like, larger than life fights where you had to, like, climb up these giant golems and shit. Like, I love the Metroidvania games, and that genre that, Metroid and Castlevania created made some very amazing Metroidvanias that would come later. Sure. Games like Hollow Knight and Dead Cells, if you haven't played them, they're on PC. They're great. I'd pick them up. So it was really hard for me to go to Lords of Shadow, where I'm like, I wasn't a huge God of War fan. I didn't play a lot of the Devil May Cry games. So I was kind of like, it just wasn't my cup of tea, I guess.
Uh-huh.
Which may have been the same response for a lot of people. I think people were looking for that same realized Metroidvania style game that it was basically pretty linear, if memory serves.
Nice.
But yeah, Castlevania games. If you can pick up a copy of Symphony of the Night or the Super NES Classic with Super Castlevania 4, or the NES Classic with Castlevania. Castlevania 1's a classic. Like, if you haven't played it, it's super hard. It's super damning, but so good.
You remember Castlevania 1 reminds you just how brutal those NES games can be.
Oh yeah, because your jump cycle was like forced. Like, there was a certain arc, and you had to figure out very early on what that arc was, because if you did it wrong, you'd fall to your death.
You also had a gigantic hitbox.
Oh, big hitbox.
If you were midway through a jump and something even like approached you, like, whew, that was it.
Yeah, and then you'd get knocked back, and so a lot of those like platforming levels with enemies that were integrated into the platforming could be a pain in the ass. The whip was also had like a bit of a delay.
Yep.
So, you know, away from the modern days of if you press a button, something immediately happens. There's like this almost like second delay where like if you have to kind of anticipate the attack
before some of those villains.
Right. Those games were pretty hard, but they're definitely super fun to play.
I will say, playing Super Castlevania 4, I think gives you the experience of playing the early Castlevania games. And it's still challenging, but it's not quite as brutal. So
yeah, because they
experience the fun without necessarily the challenge level. 4 is a good game.
Yeah. That's guys, that's Castlevania.
Yeah, it's a good franchise. Well,
and you know what?
Yeah,
I'm mad because Dracula left as a bat through my ceiling, and now there's just like a bat-shaped hole in my ceiling.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, I muted it after I died, but you know.
Oh, okay. Well, here's the thing, Cody. I'll avenge you.
Nice, thank you. Are you going to get the legendary consecrated vampire killer?
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing. This is something I never told you.
Yeah,
Cody. Joe is my middle name. You know what my first name is?
Steven.
It's Alucard.
Wait, hold on. Are you telling me that your name is Alucard Joe Dracula?
Yeah, it's not a great name. That's why I go by Joe.
Dracula must be a dick.
Yeah. That's why I go by Joe. He was like, all right, we'll throw you a bone. Your real name will be Joe. So anyways,
nice.
How about here, let's think about it.
Yeah.
It's the spookiest time of the year, so fill yourself with cheer from the middle section where we tell you about our social media here. Hey guys, welcome to the middle section.
Woof.
Thank you.
Man.
Thank you. I'm bowing in my
100%.
Yeah.
That needs to go in the archives of internet history forever.
Just the worst.
No, it's the best. I love it.
Hey guys, welcome to the middle section.
Yeah, welcome. This is where we tell you about all of our ways to get at us, to contact us, to get in on this conversation, to hear our thoughts about maybe the things you ask or just the general topics that you might want to be interested in us talking about. If you want to get at us on Twitter, that's when we post things like how this episode's going up early this week. Instead of Thursday night, it'll be Tuesday night, Wednesday morning to align with the holidays. Woohoo! You can see all of our stuff on Twitter at fandomr_podcast.
Go there.
Yeah, if you want to send us a question, oftentimes we will leave a section open for questions or fanfic for the garbage kid. You can send us an email at fanroulettepodcast@gmail.com. You can also find all of our episodes, a little bio of us, and a little description at the bottom that gives you all of our social media links and a area to pose questions that will be sent to our email at www.fandomroulette.com.
That's a good email.
We're also on iTunes and SoundCloud and wherever you get podcasts from. So help us get up there on the ladders, on them leaderboards. I want to be the high score. So do the liking and the subscribing and sharing us around. This is our beautiful passion baby, and we worked really hard on it. So if you could give us a little bit of loving, we would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah. We're
also on Facebook and Instagram and Tumblr at Fandom Roulette. So you can find us there.
All right, yes. Middle section time. All right.
Perfect.
Oh, man, Cody, here's a weird thing. This week we're not talking about Dungeons and Dragons. But
what?
Uh-oh.
Oh, no.
I think it got mad that we said those foul words.
Oh, no. Are your allergies kicking up again?
No, I smelled something bad. It's a garbage kid.
Oh, man. What does it smell like?
It smells like... Eldritch horror. Yeah.
It smells like the unknown and fear.
Exactly. So anyway, guys, this is Garbage Kids, where periodically we're switching off once a week. Cody and I go to a little book called Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Now, I know what you're thinking. You can't possibly mean everything. I do mean everything. In about the midway through the book, the middle section of the book, if you will, there are tables that you can roll on to kind of build a character completely from scratch. But the fun thing about it is that sometimes it creates some like really weird, wacky combos. And then Cody and I try to determine whether or not this character would shop at Hot Topic.
Yes, it is patent pending rating system developed by a team of scientists working on a doomsday monster to end the planet. So.
I mean, yeah, exactly. Okay, was that a Watchmen joke?
I mean, it was a reference.
Okay, good. I liked it. So anyway, this week's Garbage Kid is named Zeal Dyer.
Ooh,
I know. I like
Zeal.
I
like him or her.
And honestly, this character follows their race's naming convention, because they're a tiefling warlock. So like, if you go to like the tiefling section, like a lot of times they're named after like a personality trait.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah, like it's like, patience or prudence, or at least that's what the pub says. But anyways, So before they were a warlock, they were a charlatan. They are
classic.
They are neutral evil.
What? Not the lawful good that I've been waiting for?
No, I know. I was sad. I wrote bad. They knew who their parents were or are, and one parent was a tiefling and the other was a devil.
Whoa. That's some second generation stuff.
Right?
Yeah.
They were born in a sage's laboratory. They had 5 siblings who were older than them.
Oh.
And they were raised by a single father or stepfather. Their mother disappeared to an unknown fate. And I really want to desperately believe that the father was the devil.
Oh, it totally is like a devil scenario. Like,
go to your room, son. Go to your room.
They lived a comfortable
you're not my real dad.
They lived in a comfortable lifestyle, and they lived in a small house.
Oh,
the
devil finally settled down.
I know, right? It's a nice little house. This has sitcom potential all over it. It's like, he's a devil who didn't know what to do with their life, and one day he got a baby, and now his days are filled with delight. It's the devil and Zeal living their life all day. The devil and Zeal making their life okay.
Tonight on TBS, 8 p.m.
I'd watch it. Oh my god, it ran for half an episode. They canceled the commercial to break 2. They put out an old episode of Conan.
Yeah.
They always found it easy to make friends, and they loved being around other people. They became a charlatan because they learned early on that people are gullible and easy to exploit. And they became a warlock because when they were faced with a terrible crisis, they prayed to any being who would listen, and the creature that answered their prayers became their patron.
Which is also their father.
This makes this next one rough then.
Oh, no.
Their patron tricked them into a pact and treats them as a slave.
Oh, no.
The special terms, when directed, they must take immediate action against a specific enemy of your patron. And their binding mark, one of their eyes looks the same as the one of the eyes of their patron.
Oh, he's got his daddy's eyes.
Yeah, well, at least one of them. Okay, wait a second. Okay, quick sidebar. Do you remember when the first royal? Did you ever read any Onion articles after the first royal baby was born?
No.
And like they're making all of these like jokes that it was like a demon spawn, and it was like baby has grandfather's eyes, and it's this claw with these 2 eyeballs like in the hand. It was amazing. So anyways,
man,
they're 31 to 40 years old with 6 life events.
Cool, I like
they
it.
They fell in love and got married.
Aww.
Even with the weird eyeball. They gained a bit of good fortune. A distant relative left them a stipend that enables them to live comfortable lifestyle for 14 years.
Uncle Satan left a stipend.
Right? Is it really? You know what? Yeah, he's
probably so perfect.
I would watch the hell out of this sitcom.
Oh,
for the
man.
record. No pun intended. They
Uncle
had a child.
Satan's coming over.
Oh, guys, get out the good china. You know how he likes to make fun of me for my comfortable lifestyle.
Dad, what's China? Shut up!
I also love the idea of Uncle Satan coming in, like, in flash and brimstone, and then there's, like, the crowd cheer.
Yeah. He has the Kramer hair.
And, who is he played by?
I will think on it, and I will get back to you.
Okay.
About that. So they suffered a tragedy. They did something that brought terrible shame to them in the eyes of their family.
No.
They might have been involved in a scandal, dabbled in dark magic. That's almost certainly true. Or offended someone important. The attitude of their family.
I like for this one that they dabbled in good magic, and Papa Devil was just like, "Oh, you zeal."
Uncle Satan was so mad. He was so embarrassed.
Brought shame upon the whole devil family.
So they encountered something magical. They witnessed a powerful spell being cast by a cleric, a druid, a sorcerer, a warlock, or a wizard. That's kind of boring. They had a supernatural
that one
experience.
checks with the first one, or the one before it.
Oh, I guess that's fair.
They dabbled in good magic and saw a cleric do something good.
And then they had I like this. This is good. We gotta write this down. TM.
This is good shit.
You had a supernatural experience. They saw a demon and ran away before they could do anything to them. I mean, so here's what I think happened.
Okay.
One time Uncle Satan comes over and he brought his obnoxious son with him, and his obnoxious son was a demon somehow. And it was like
bargain, some kind of trick.
It's like, hey there, cousin Zeal. And it's like, oh god, no! And he ran away.
Oh no.
And that's it. That's the last one.
Okay.
So go back. That was Zeal and Devil, making it one day at a time.
So I already know my answer to the popular opinion, or the popular poll. Did they shop at Hot Topic? And yes.
100% yes.
100%.
No questions asked. Yeah, 100%.
Most of their wardrobe is late 80s to 2000s rock band t-shirts.
Oh my god, yes. Or
their entire dresser is covered in Livestrong bands and those sweatbands that for like the various different like cartoons that were out in the like 90s.
Yes. Oh, so good.
And is constantly listening to Hawthorne Heights, if memory serves.
Oh, so good.
Very specifically,
here's the thing.
his favorite, or his or her they favorite song is "Ohio is for Lovers."
Cody,
yeah,
I'm actually gonna do a classic, a patented Joe switch around.
yeah.
I'm gonna ask you a harder question.
Okay.
Do you think that Zeal ever went into a Dillard's?
No, not at all.
No, not at all. Okay, that was not
Never.
actually that hard of a question.
Definitely, like, ran away as soon as someone would try to take them into Dillard's.
It's like, Zeal, you have to look nice for your school portrait. And it's like, but Dad. But anyways, and then Uncle Satan shows up. I'm still thinking about it, by the way. I'm trying to think of contemporary comedy stars who are big enough that they would come on as like a guest appearance every now and then and not want to become like a regular cast member.
Right. Okay. No. We can move on to the next section.
Yeah.
Section, and then
yeah,
we'll find out right before we close out.
I'll have an answer.
Okay. So now go ahead.
Oh yeah. So this week, as we were preparing, we wanted to talk about role playing games. And there are options in Dungeons and Dragons for adding spooky elements and spooky things. Obviously, like there's the Curse of Strahd campaign. Cody has a famous NPC in the 6th campaign who's definitely a vampire.
Stop.
No matter what he says.
No.
Hashtag Pops is a vampire. Get it trending.
Hashtag Pops is not a vampire.
Hashtag Pops is a vampire. Get it trending. But anyways. There is actually a system out there that very much is appropriate for a thematic episode of vampires. It is called Vampire the Masquerade. Now, Vampire the Masquerade is a tabletop role-playing game system that was first released in 1991 by an organization called White Wolf Publishing, and it was the first of several storyteller system games for its World of Darkness setting line. So this was, kind of like a new system. It was first, what's what I'm looking for here, premiered at, Gen Con, I want to say.
Okay.
And, it, has really, grown into its own little phenomenon over the years. There are, so obviously there's a live action role playing game, there are collectible card games, there are video games, there are lots of novels, and in 1996, a short-lived television series loosely based on the game called Kindred the Embraced was produced by Aaron Spelling for the Fox Broadcasting Company. But I think we were both looking at the 2011 Player Handbook, which was the 20th anniversary edition. Am I correct in this?
I haven't the slightest. I actually picked this up. I picked up the 5th edition one, which was
okay. Well,
the most recent version of Vampire the Masquerade.
Which if memory serves, was picked up by like another game publishing system or developers. I think White Wolf might have gone defunct, but I could be wrong. But needless to say, it is a different way of doing role playing games. So, do you want to talk a little bit about the Player Handbook?
Dude, I would love to talk about the handbook. This book, granted, there's only, as far as I'm aware, for 5th edition Vampire the Masquerade, there is one single book for both player and what they call the storyteller master.
Yeah.
Or storyteller. I'm so used to like dungeon master or game master that like for some reason master needs to be at the end. Sure. But yeah, as the storyteller, man, there's like 100 pages of flavor before you ever actually get to any sort of advice or mechanics for the game
of explaining how like the game works in general.
Right. And I guess that makes sense for a game that you may, much like, at least for me, I had heard of Vampire the Masquerade and I've seen people play it. so I kind of loosely understood how it worked. But I don't know anything about the lore or how any of the stuff works, and it's nice that they have like a section right at the beginning that is like, here is basically a little mini novel of the lore of Vampire the Masquerade. Yeah.
Which is really
and
cool.
That totally, at least for me, got me in the right headspace for the game, because they do very early on tell you, like, this is not your average hero style or even good person style role-playing game.
Yeah.
In fact, they make mention several times that you are a bloodthirsty monster who is, hanging on to the very little bit of humanity they have left.
Yeah.
Which also is a interesting mechanic that comes into play, is your humanity and what's left of it. In fact, you can go so below your humanity that if you hit a certain threshold, you no longer can play that character because you're no longer like in control of yourself.
Yeah, it's suggested that every vampire has within them this notion of the beast. And if you fully truly embrace the notion of the beast, then yeah, you've basically become a feral monster, and like you cannot play anymore, because basically at that point it would be like, oh look, it's a moving thing, I attack it and kill it and eat it. Whereas like,
right, and not necessarily you can't play anymore, you would have to make a new character, but yeah, it's a cool,
you can't play as that character anymore.
Right. I like the mechanics of this game. It uses a pool of dice system, whereas games like Dungeons and Dragons or D100s, like, you are using a fixed amount of die to determine an outcome. In this, your stats and skills determine your dice pool.
Yes. And
you roll that dice pool to try and get, basically, I think it's a 6 or higher on any one of those D10s.
Yeah.
And however many of those get over a 6 are successes, and that's how you determine if you, like, the storyteller will give you a difficulty, like difficulty of 3. So in your pool of dice, you need to roll 3 successes on your on that roll. Mm-hmm. I also noticed that the game, interestingly enough, very early on, tries to almost forego its dice mechanics pretty early on. I don't know if you noticed that, but
elaborate, please.
So at one point they're discussing how skill checks work, where it's like, okay, the storyteller will ask you to roll a stat, which I think there's like 5 stats, like your main stats, like strength and dexterity and stuff like that, and then a skill. So you might be like, roll strength plus brawl, which is kind of like a close quarters, like, I'm going to punch this dude in the face.
Sure, yeah.
And so while they're explaining the mechanics of like, okay, then that character takes the D10s and whatever, and then rolls the dice, and you've made the difficulty 2. They have to get 2 successes. Well, early on, they're like, they almost like hesitate to tell you to roll often or roll at all. Like at some point they're like, you know what? If the character says like they want to do something, like as long as it's within their bounds, like just, you don't have to roll. And I guess there's a level of, it's basically depending on who your storyteller, your dungeon master, your game master is. Me personally, I'm kind of in the middle of, I like to roll dice, but I'm also okay with not rolling them if the player comes up with something creative and unique. So it was just very interesting how easy and how quick, once they start talking about mechanics, how they were like, you know what, just fuck the system.
Yeah. Like,
just do, and they're like, when you read the mechanics, it definitely feels like story is always at the forefront. This is a storytelling game.
Yeah.
Now, me personally, I'm kind of in the middle. Like, I like a little bit of mechanics. Like, that's the reason we roll dice, is to simulate the odds of that working. But I'm also realistic. I don't think everything needs a roll. I think if you're a capable vampire, like, you should be able to do simple things like start a car and parallel park on a busy street. Like that kind of shit is like whatever. But if you're in a gunfight with some dude who knows how to kill you and you're like pinned against a wall, like, yeah, I'm gonna have you roll dice. We're gonna figure this shit out.
Sure. And I think too, like, I think that they would agree with you to a certain extent.
Sure.
Where it's like, it does feel like the dice pool thing is designed for a combat encounter, but at the same time, they talk about how they don't think combat encounters should be like incredibly long or an incredible focal point of like the game.
Yeah, like they even talk about how in the case of combat, turns are as long as the storyteller needs them to be.
Yeah.
So in the case of like, say we were running a game and you wanted to take a couple shots at a dude. Well, that turn can be 2 seconds or 3 minutes, depending on what exactly you're asking to do.
Sure.
And that's kind of a neat, that's a neat idea for, whereas things like Dungeons and Dragons and even Pathfinder and lots of games like kind of cemented in that kind of Dungeons and Dragons world, like there is a set time for every turn and every round.
Everything
and
6 seconds.
Yeah, it's like 6 seconds, and there's a formula and there's measurements for everything. Like, whereas this game, it's kind of like, nah, storyteller, just figure it out. Like, if you want it to be long, cool. If you don't, that's all right too.
Yeah.
Which is really, I feel like this game is very accessible in that way.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree with you on that for sure.
Maybe not so much in the theme, because it's a very specific like evil gothic horror theme, but like in terms of mechanics, I feel like compared to some of the other systems that I've read, this one's pretty accessible.
Yeah.
I also like that the stats and numbers are basically 0 through 5. You never have to worry about high numbers.
Yeah.
Basically, you get to select like what you're good at. So like if you want to be a good strength person, 0 is like a pitiful weakling, 5 is like an Olympic lifter, is the example I think they use.
Yes.
And it's nice because that should in theory mean that your dice pools will never get over 10 d10s,
which I think is by design.
Yeah. There's also like a neat hunger system where as you forego feeding, you get these bad dice basically that I think it's like on crit failures, you start to like get almost the comparison is almost like levels of exhaustion.
Yeah.
Where your dice no longer are helping you, they're hindering you. And then, so it's good to kind of find a balance between feeding on people and like holding out, because obviously from a narrative standpoint, like literally feasting on a human probably has a lot of consequences to bear.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong too. Can't you use, if I was reading this correctly, you can almost use your like feeding as like luck in like an apocalypse game?
Kind of, yeah. There was like a willpower mechanic where
bump up your skill a little bit.
Yeah, you could re-roll certain dice, but if you can't re-roll hunger dice, which are your bad dice. At least as far as I could tell.
Yeah. And then
go on.
One of the things that I think is super cool about this is just all of the attention they've paid to just all of the various kinds of vampires that have existed over the years.
Oh, yeah, they do a really cool job with, like, there's, like, different clans. I think there's 8 or 9 in total, and they all stem from Cain, which is kind of a neat idea, and,
yeah, they're the cursed children of Cain, so...
Yeah, and the idea, the really cool, like, one of the clans is Nosferatu, and, like, all of that clan is, like, horribly disfigured, much like... the almost comical look of Nosferatu.
Yeah, and then there are some that like when you become a vampire, like you basically like embrace the time and fashion and sensibilities of when you were turned. So it's like that's like your kind of like foppish dandy like vampires. And then there are some that are like revolutionaries, and they like dress in like flannel and like cut off jeans and like very 90s looks, and those are from like, you know, movies like The Lost Boys, where it's like a very modern, cool vampire aesthetic.
And there's also like there's a faction, I believe they're called the Blue Blood or Blue something, where they're basically mobsters, and that somehow like that sings with me for some reason. Like if I were to play one, I'd definitely want to be like a mobster.
Let's see if I can find it.
There's also
the Giovanni. No.
I think so, yeah.
Possible.
But either way, there's like lots of cool gothic horror styles. You can even pick which era of vampire you are, and that gives certain benefits and things like that, but also gives you some flaws attached to it. It's a very detailed game, and all of it, the first and foremost is all the mechanics are simple and accessible, but then also importantly, they fit this kind of gothic vampire society, and there's like rules of what they call the Masquerade, where they basically live in plain sight with, you know, humans and people alike, and they're, you know, they introduce like a villain almost immediately in the stuff called like the Second Inquisition, and they're like a group of vampire slayers who so it's like very easy for a DM or a storyteller to really kind of get into this lore very quickly. There's also what is also really neat that I don't think a lot of games do, and I feel like they should, is there's like a relationship board that you get to build.
Yeah.
And basically you get to pick like people who are attached to you from your humanity, who fed or who they call it embraced you, which is like how you turned. So whoever your, you know, your father or sire, I guess is what they call them.
Yeah.
Is, and then your relationship with your different party members, and you all get to pick like how that works. And there's lots of neat story. Like this is a storytelling game, and I think they did a really good job at emphasizing that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. I'd actually be curious to try it out at some point.
Yeah.
I remember it being something that I kind of like read through the rule books. And then I've actually played another storytelling game that I've mentioned on the podcast before called Scion.
Okay.
Where like you play as the like children of God, so you're basically like new age demigods, kind of like American God style.
Okay. Okay.
Now the thing was, admittedly, I didn't give it necessarily the fairest shake because I was jumping into a campaign that had been going on for a little while, so I was relatively weak compared to everyone else. But it was still pretty cool. For sure. But yeah.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to our last little section?
Yeah, the last thing, you can search for this. I believe it is actually still White Wolf Gaming.
Yes.
I looked it up for you. Okay. And I believe the player's this little handbook was only $25.
Yeah, so it's an affordable game too.
So it's a very affordable RPG. I would definitely look it up if this interests you.
Yeah, and if we ever end up playing it, we'll maybe do like a little special RPG section, break away from the normal season structure.
Hell yeah!
Update about it. So, one last thing. We'll make this quick because we're starting to get a little lengthy here. But we wanted to do a grab bag section about a couple of vampire related pieces of media.
Yeah.
So the first one, and this is one I know we both watched, a good chunk of, is Castlevania on Netflix.
Yes.
So, wow, surprise, Castlevania. So Castlevania.
Well, it's funny that we actually watched this literally last weekend together.
Yeah. We had watched the first episode of the first season when it came out over a year ago. And then season 2 dropped on Friday, but we rewatched season 1 because like no one else in the room had seen season 1 except me and my friend Joel.
Yeah.
And it is a couple things about it. The animation is absolutely gorgeous, although it is quite gory. Yes. So if you don't like blood, it might not be your thing.
Well, blood, decapitation, body horror.
Yeah,
lots
disembowelment.
Yeah, this
demons running away
I
with
would say
babies.
this is leaning towards like Elfen Lied and Attack on Titan levels of gore.
Sure. Yeah, so if gore's not your thing...
that first one's an old one. I don't even know if anyone will recognize that. Anyways, go on.
It's written by Warren Ellis, who's personally one of my favorite comic book writers.
Nice.
Warren Ellis has he's a pretty good master of tone, in my opinion, where when he chooses a tone, he commits to it, but he is also able to bring in moments of levity to make it a little bit more fun, so it's not just grim dread all the time.
Sure. What's your favorite bit from him? Like, what's your go-to?
So he wrote this amazing comic called Next Wave Agents of Hate, HATE,
okay.
Which is a Marvel comic, and it is a very funny comic. He argues that it's a pure raw comic where people pose for no reason and punch each other and then explode. And there is
nice.
it's great. There is an amazing moment where they are fighting like the bad guys, like 5 generals, and the one is an Australian who throws radioactive blue koalas on them.
Okay, yeah. That sounds right up that alley.
It's a bizarre comic, but he's also written like very, very good comics. I mean, Next Wave's really good, but he's written very serious comics that are very good. He's written weird, wacky comics that are good. He actually wrote an amazing run of Moon Knight, which is really good.
Okay.
But yeah, in this one, like, I think one of my favorite things is, at the end of the first episode, after you're watching, blood and gore and horror, like, you're in this weird little town, and there are these 2 guys who are having a conversation about how he got in trouble for knocking out a person who was having sex with his goat. And that's, like, the most Warren Ellis thing, to go from body horror to just, like, a rather mundane conversation about goat fucking.
Yeah, it was so bizarre, but I loved every second of it.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts? And so, season 2 is season 1 is 4 episodes. Season 2 is 8 episodes. So it's not a huge
to me,
investment.
it felt like Netflix was originally going to make that a movie, and then they were like, "Oh shit, you mean this was a season thing? Like, oh, okay, I guess we can cut this into 4 episodes." Because that was like, those 4 episodes were what, 40 minutes a piece?
No, they were only 20 minutes a piece.
Oh shit, it was even shorter. Yeah, like it would have been a good, solid like movie.
Yeah, for sure. I would agree with that.
And there's some really cool fight scenes, even towards the end of it. There's a really cool fight with a pretty infamous Castlevania character, and the animation's really good. I would if you are looking to make a fighting anime, and you're looking for like animation tips, like look at Castlevania as your reference, because I think they did a really bang up job.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
And then one other little suggestion I would like to make, and if you have anything you want to throw out, I'll give you the floor, but less than a minute pitch. If you have Amazon Prime, go find and watch What We Do in the Shadows. What We Do in the Shadows is a mockumentary from the great nation of New Zealand, which was written by Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement. From Taika Waititi directed Thor Ragnarok, and Jermaine Clement is part of Fly of the Conchords and was also the voice of Tamatoa in the hit film Moana. And it is a mockumentary about a coven of 4 vampires who are living in Wellington, New Zealand, and it is prepping them to go to something that is referred to as, I believe it's called the Dark Ball, which happens every year when all the paranormal get together. It's a fun, dry little mockumentary, and it's especially fun to think about it in terms of after making this movie and another little independent New Zealand film, then Taika Waititi was trusted with $130 million to direct Thor Ragnarok. So
very cool.
It's a little mundane little thing that has like some pretty impressive low budget special effect work. I'm not gonna lie, but
cool. I
would recommend it. It like I said, if you have Amazon Prime, it's free on Amazon Prime. So, do you have any vampire things to suggest?
Yeah, it was originally a book, came out as several movies. It's this great trilogy called Twilight.
Interesting.
I think it's very solid. If you're looking for basically the weirdest, like, non-sexy vampires who are trying to be sexy in a single trilogy. They get into weird stuff in book 3. Some of it I'm not cool with, but I'm sure, you know, lots of people out there are on the fence. Yeah, I give Twilight my professional opinion 2 thumbs down out of 10.
Okay. Anyways, thank you guys so much for listening to Phantom Roulette. Please rate, review, and subscribe. Go back to the middle section to learn about our social media, do all that stuff. This is fun. That was a good vampire episode. Very spooky.
Did you like that bit?
Very spooky. I was so spooked. The whole time. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, please go back to social media. More of that. Any final thoughts, Cody? Vampires are scary. Blah.
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 No. Castlevania is great, and thank you guys so much for listening to our second annual Spook-tacular spooky event, Spook-and-Air.
Spook-tacular Spook-and-Air. Who knows what we'll talk about next year?
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you so much for listening to yet another episode of Phantom Roulette. Signing off, this is Joe.
And I'm Cody.
And as always, stay nerdy.
Stay super nerdy.